struggled to call my son by his chosen name at home, even after 5 years, and now silence fills our conversations. I, 58 male, have a child, FTM 17, who is transgender. My child uses he/him pronouns at school and around friends and also goes by a preferred name at school. My wife and I signed off on anything related to school, and refer to my child with the preferred name and pronouns around teachers and friends. We are also in the process of hiring a college counselor, and introduce my child with the preferred name and pronouns to said counselor since that's what will be going on the college application. Last night, my child asked me to talk about why I or my wife haven't used the preferred name and pronouns at home, despite it being 5 years since my child came out. My child seemed laid back and steady the entire conversation, but also seemed to be frustrated throughout parts, particularly at my answers. The truth is, as I told my child, I need a little more time. I've called my child one thing for 17 years, it's not easy to just switch at the press of a button. My child also pointed out that some friends who are transgender have much more flexible parents when it comes to all this, but I feel like my wife and I have been doing a good job. We got stuff set up with the school, we refer to my child in the preferred way around friends. I don't understand why my child is upset. I haven't used their legal name in years, but apparently that's not enough? In my defense, my child has never formally asked me or my wife to use the preferred name or pronouns at home. I asked my child about this, and the response was that it's not something I should have to ask you, it's something you just do. I feel like my feelings aren't being considered here, it's not an easy change. I told my child that I was sorry things weren't moving as fast as my child might like, but that I need time to process. We ended the conversation there, on what I thought was a positive note, but my child has been giving me the silent treatment since they woke up this morning. I've told my wife that we should all have a discussion this weekend, but I'm worried it won't have the outcome my child wants. I'm very grateful that my child has been so patient, but I feel like some things might be said that my child will regret and I'm worried for how that might impact our relationship. Apologies for the ramble, I don't have a lot of experience in this, and was hoping for some thoughts from people in a similar situation, or know people in a similar situation. Ida? Edit 1, I've seen a lot of rage bait comments, and I can assure you, I am not nearly that talented of a writer to come up with this on my own. This is a real person's story, and I appreciate seeing all the advice I've received. My family is having a discussion this weekend, and I don't really know how updates work on this subreddit, but I might post an update afterward if people are interested. Edit 2, I did not expect this post to gain so much attention. I appreciate all the helpful advice and DMs I've received. Replying to comments is a bit overwhelming, but I assure you I've read as many as I can. Update 1. A lot has happened, and while my child is away at camp, I thought I would take the time to post an update. I received a lot of advice in the thousands of comments and dozens of DM requests I got. A lot of this advice was a wake-up call that I and my wife really needed, and I appreciate everyone who took the time to send thoughtful and constructive responses. To those who wrote that my child was mentally ill, that he was just confused, or that I needed to send him to a conversion camp, shame on all of you. My child is happy, he is loved, and he is not going to hell just for being who he is. On to what happened. My family and I had a series of discussions following the original conversation I had with my child. To put it simply, we realized how important it was for my child to be referred to with his preferred name and pronouns all the time, including home life. Over the months that have passed since our discussion, I have been referring to my child by his preferred name as much as I can. Yes, I occasionally mess up, but I am trying my hardest. He went to prom this year with his friends, and I took him to rent a suit for the first time. When we left with the suit in hand, he turned to me and said that it was the first time I hadn't made a single mistake, and that he really felt like my son for the first time. I won't lie, it made me tear up a little. We also went to a Father's Day baseball game this year, like we always do, but he told me after that it felt like this was the first father-son game instead of a daddy-daughter game. Even though our team got absolutely demolished, I think that was the most fun I've ever had at a game with him. It made me realize that I was putting my own comfort first, when in reality, seeing him this happy should have been my #1 priority. I've been talking to my mother about referring to my child with the correct name and pronouns, and it's been a little slower. She's been to my son's theater performances where his preferred name is listed in the program, but I don't think she's fully understood that that name is going to be a permanent thing, not a school nickname. I don't expect her to fully get it, and my child is very understanding. However, my wife is still getting used to it, and it's definitely taking her a lot more time. My son will often point out how she goes out of her way to use non-specific language when talking about him. For example, he lost his keys last week, and when my wife told me, she said I can't find the keys. The is to show the pause she made when thinking of what to say. I didn't notice it very much at first, and I will admit, part of it is because I used to make a similar mistake, but it's gotten pretty noticeable. I've talked to her in private, but she's always been less willing, and part of me thinks she truly believes it's a phase. I don't know what to tell her. My son is relatively fine with it, but goes out of his way to avoid being around my wife when she's talking about him. Family events are also a bit of a nightmare. My wife's side of the family is huge and she loves hosting, but they aren't the greatest with my son's name and pronouns. Surprisingly, though, her father has been pretty good, calling my child he and occasionally using male pronouns, but it depends on who he's talking to. There is another trans member on my mother's side, but there has been a lot of hostility surrounding this person, and I wonder if part of that hostility is leaking onto how the family views my son as well. My son has discussed HRT, and I know he has plans to start as soon as he turns 18. I'm still discussing this with my wife, who is against it. She wants him to wait until he's done with college as she's worried with all the change that will happen then, that HRT would just be too much. I don't know what to think. He has been saving money from basically anywhere he can. He worked a job last summer and I know he has a couple hundred in his piggy bank. Our insurance would cover it, but it's under my wife's name, so she would have to allow it, if I'm not mistaken. I know my son has done more research than I have. I know he's been looking forward to this, and I know he's a sneaky kid. He'll find a way to get his hands on it with or without my wife and I. I just want him to be safe and happy. I sincerely apologize for all my rambling. I never thought I'd update this post because I wasn't sure if I'd have anything good to report. My wife and I are working on getting my son back into therapy, the normal kind, not the one that will deny my son his much deserved happiness. He was in it before, but asked to be removed from his then current therapist because it wasn't helping him very much. He's asked for a younger therapist, one that has more shared interests, and one that specializes in transgender youth. We're working on it. I think if that goes smoothly then we'll all be better off. My son has brought up family therapy, but my wife is very much against it. She doesn't really believe in all that stuff. Update 2. I'm writing this with a half-empty cup of cold coffee next to me and a little blue disposable razor sitting on a folded paper towel on the counter like it's a trophy. That razor was the undoing of me today, in a good way, I guess, and I'll get to that. My son came back from camp sunburned and taller, or maybe just standing taller. He came home with a string bracelet from a friend, a terrible tan line, and a schedule already written out in his notes app with dates circled. His birthday, the clinic intake, the DMV, and college essay deadlines. He'd done most of the legwork while he was gone. He's a resourceful kid, always has been, and there it was, spelled out, as matter of fact as if he were finishing a summer reading list. His 18th birthday was small on purpose. He asked for pizza and to watch the old baseball movie he and I have watched every year since he was a kid. My wife did a cake, we all sang, and for the first time I saw a look on his face that told me he didn't feel like we were pretending something for him. It wasn't a big declaration or anything, but that quiet kind of relief you see when someone finally sets down a heavy bag they've been carrying longer than they should have. 2 days later, we were at the clinic. I drove. My wife didn't want to come. She said she wasn't ready, and I told her as calmly as I could that it wasn't about readiness anymore, it was about reality, and our son was already there. The clinic was bright and unremarkable, which I think was the point. We sat in a small room with a nurse who had kind eyes and zero patience for nonsense. When she handed my son the consent forms, he did not hesitate. I watched his hands. They didn't shake. We went over options. I didn't know there were so many in the weeds: gels, patches, injections, frequency, cost. The nurse did the thing with the orange to show us how to inject and then asked who would be doing them at home, and without looking at me my son said, "Me." Then he looked at me anyway like he was checking for disappointment. I surprised myself and asked if she could show me too, just in case. My hands did shake when I held the syringe next to that orange, and the nurse squeezed my shoulder and said I did fine. We left with a prescription sent off to the pharmacy under my wife's insurance, because that's how our life is set up, and my son squeezed the little packet of information like it was a boarding pass. There was a hiccup, of course. The pharmacy sent the explanation of benefits to my wife's email that afternoon, and she saw it before I could warn her. It was bad for a few hours. She said I'd gone behind her back. I said he's legally an adult and I wasn't going to stand in his way. Words were said that we both couldn't take back right away. Our son took the dog for an hour-long walk to get out of earshot. When he came back, she put dinner on the table and didn't look at either of us. He ate quietly and then went to his room. I did the dishes. Later that night, she sat on the stairs and cried. She said she felt like she was losing her daughter, and I told her she didn't lose a person, only an idea of one, and that none of us were ever the ideas our parents had for us. Anyway, she didn't like that, but she didn't disagree either. The next morning, she put his insurance card on the counter next to his keys and said, "Call me if there's a problem at the pharmacy." It wasn't perfect, but it was a bridge she chose to walk onto rather than burn. He started. I don't know a better way to say it. We picked up the box, and I watched him sit at the kitchen table with his supplies laid out with a precision I have never, ever witnessed during homework hour. He took a breath, and then he did it. No fanfare. No speech. He put the cap back on, took another breath, and smiled without meaning to. It looked like summer when you turn the fan on high and air moves in a room that's been still and too hot. I hugged him even though he was trying to play it cool. He let me. A week later, he came into the bathroom while I was shaving and asked if he could watch. It sounds silly to type out, but there we were, two people in a steamed up mirror. I told him the curve under your chin is the tricky part and that you'll cut yourself there if you don't flatten the skin. He said he knows because he's been watching videos. I bought him his own razor that afternoon because I remembered being 17 and using my dad's once and catching hell for it. He laughed when I handed it to him like I'd given him the keys to a very small, very inefficient car. This morning, before I sat down to write, he stood in that same bathroom with his hair sticking up, and a smear of shaving cream on his ear, and I watched him line up his jaw. He nicked himself, Just a dot, and swore softly. Then he wiped it away and started over. There were other firsts. We went to the DMV on a Tuesday because someone told us that days matter there, that if you go on a Monday you'll be there until Thursday. He wore his favorite button down, the one I bought him for prom that he has refused to let me take to the dry cleaners because he swears I'll lose it. The woman behind the desk was efficient and bored and a gift to this world because she didn't make any of it a thing. She read his letter from the clinic, typed something into her terminal, and asked him if he wanted to update his height while he was at it. He said yes, proudly. When she handed him the temporary license and said, "All right, sir, you're all set," he wrinkled his nose at sir. He's not quite used to that word yet, but when we got to the parking lot, he stared at the M on the line, and pressed his thumb over it like he could rub it into the plastic. He slid it into his wallet and for once didn't make a joke. On the drive home, I kept catching him in the rearview mirror just checking that it hadn't disappeared. There was a blow-up I wish we'd avoided. My wife threw her big end of summer barbecue like she always does. She set out the good platters and did the thing where she lines up the napkins by color even though people grab them randomly anyway. Her side of the family filled the house, voices and shoes in every corner. It was going well until her sister arrived late and went straight into old habits loudly and in front of more people than I could count. My son froze and then left out the back door. I went after him. He was sitting on the stoop with his knees pulled up, not crying, but not okay either. I asked him what he wanted me to do. He said he wanted to go, and I said then we go. We left. I told my wife by text. That night we had the worst fight we've had in years. She accused me of choosing him over her family. I told her I was choosing him over people who couldn't use his name. I told her too that a house is only a home if the person who lives in it isn't bracing for impact all the time. It was cold in our bed that night, but the next day she sent a message to her siblings and cousins before I could. She wrote that our son's name is his name, and that if they couldn't handle that then they should handle their own dinners. She wrote it in her own words and she didn't read it to me first. That matters. We tried therapy, all three of us, after that. I made the appointment and told them the time. My wife came because I said I was going whether or not she did. The therapist spoke to us like we were ordinary, which is apparently not what my wife expected and exactly what she needed. She said something that has been echoing around our kitchen ever since, that grief and love can sit next to each other at the same table without throwing food. My wife admitted that she keeps trying to outweight our son's insistence with the hope that it will fade, and that admitting that out loud felt like someone took the lid off a pot that had been boiling for years. Our son said he wanted a life with us in it. He said he didn't want to leave and not come back after college. He said he will, if he has to. We all got quiet in the same way at the same time. We have another appointment next week. My mother surprised me. She showed up at our door with a box I recognized immediately. It's the box she kept my father's old watch in, the one he used to wear to weddings and to Sunday church when he still went. She called ahead and asked if my son would be home. When she came in, she set the box down and said, "This was your grandfather's," and then she turned to my son and added, "He was a stubborn, handsome mule of a man, and I see all the best parts of him in my grandson." She kept her eyes on his while she said it. He didn't know what to do with his hands. She opened the box and took out the watch and fastened it around his wrist, and I swear I watched 40 years peel off her face in that one movement. Later she asked me in the kitchen if there were words she shouldn't say anymore and then wrote them down on the back of an envelope like a grocery list. She still falters sometimes, but now there's a list on her refrigerator door and a little tape-worn E on his senior photo tucked in her frame where the old name used to be. School started. Senior year is chaos, apparently, and college essays are written at the kitchen counter at midnight. I read a draft of his personal statement by accident. I was looking for the grocery list and grabbed the wrong stack of papers, and then I asked him if I could keep reading. He said yes. He wrote about sitting at the ballpark and not knowing if he was allowed to enjoy it because he didn't know if he was the right kid for the tradition, and then about the way that answer changed in the space of a game and how a loss can still be a win if it's the right kind. I had to walk away and pretend to fix a cabinet hinge because I didn't want to make a mess of it by crying right there. He's sent in a few applications already. One school has gender-inclusive housing and a line on their website that says, "Tell us who you are and we will meet you there," and you'd think that's marketing fluff, but on the tour they put us in a room with an RA who had a little pin on his lanyard that matched my son's bracelet from camp and my wife noticed. She asked questions. Real ones. She didn't tell me on the way home, but I saw her search history later because the iPad is shared and she doesn't know how to clear it. She'd looked up the nearest support group for parents. There have been what my son calls T-isms that make us laugh. I have never in my life seen anyone so excited about deodorant. He keeps checking his upper lip for evidence like a detective in a movie who knows the culprit must be here somewhere. His voice did something in the middle of dinner the other night and scared the cat. He pretended it didn't happen and then laughed so hard he snorted. There's a shirt he used to wear that slouched on him that now fits like it was made for him. He looks at himself in mirrors longer, but not with the same flinch. I never thought I'd be grateful for a pharmacy aisle, but there we were, buying shaving cream in bulk like any other dad and kid on a Saturday afternoon. We've had backslides. I slipped up and said the wrong thing in a voicemail to the doctor's office. You don't realize how ingrained a pattern is until your mouth starts without your brain, and he heard me leave it because I didn't know the machine at the clinic had a speaker. I apologized before he had to correct me. He nodded, and then he said, Thanks for catching it, like that small moment of me seeing it right away put money back into an account he wasn't sure was going to stay solvent. My wife still does the pause sometimes, but less. She said my son out loud at the grocery store when she ran into a neighbor, and after we got home she pretended it hadn't been a big deal, but she made chicken parm the way he likes it on a Tuesday for no reason. I'll take it. There's one more thing. I sent a message to my wife's family before our next get-together, plain and simple. I told them the rules of our house, and that included my son's name and pronouns, and that anything else would mean they could see themselves out. I didn't threaten, I laid out terms. Surprisingly, most of them adjusted. Her father called him and then young man and then asked him to help fix the back gate, and they were out there with a wrench for an hour longer than that gate required. Her sister, the one from the barbecue, brought an apology in the form of a bag of my son's favorite chips and a badly wrapped gift that turned out to be a stack of notebooks with his name printed on the cover. It wasn't perfect. It didn't need to be. I don't want to pretend we're through the woods because that makes people lazy and we can't afford lazy with this. But the air feels different here. There are real boundaries and real tries instead of lip service. There are also Tuesdays where we argue about laundry and who left the milk out, which feels like a miracle because it means we're not making his existence the headline every single day. He's taking his senior pictures next week in a suit that fits his shoulders properly, and the college counselor says his essay made her cry, which he pretended to hate and then told 3 different friends about in a voice that kept cracking. I'm going to finish this coffee and go look for an extra pack of razors to keep in the cabinet. He'll roll his eyes when I make a big deal of it, but he won't hide the smile. I'll take that, and I'll take every small, ordinary victory we can stack between us, until ordinary is the only thing it all feels like. Update 3. There's a small pile of dark hair in a Ziploc bag in the top drawer of my desk, which sounds like the beginning of a true crime podcast until I tell you it's my son's first barbershop haircut and he asked me to save it. The bag smells faintly of that talc they brush on your neck when they clean you up. It sits next to paper clips and a few stubborn pennies like it belongs there. He said he wanted a real cut before senior pictures, not just me with the kitchen scissors pretending I know anything about blending. So we went to the place by the hardware store where the barber chairs look like they've been bolted to the floor since 1973 and the guy at the front keeps the pot of coffee going even though no one drinks it. The barber asked him, "What are we doing today, boss?" And my son pulled up a screenshot with a low fade and a little texture on top like he'd been planning the sentence for weeks. The barber didn't blink. He spun the chair and laid the cape over him and I watched my kid sit as straight as a fence post. He flinched at the first buzz behind his ear and then relaxed. When the barber turned him toward the mirror and lifted his chin with 2 fingers to trim the line, my son held his own jaw like it was new ground he was claiming. He paid with his own money and tipped well because I told him the first time your barber treats you like you belong there, you pay it forward. He stuffed the bag of hair into my hands with a grin like he was daring me to throw it away. I didn't. Senior pictures came the next week in a school cafeteria that smelled like floor cleaner and reheated pizza. He wore the suit again and that same barber cut sat perfectly. The photographer called him young man and told him to square his shoulders, and he did, and the light in the room changed, I swear it did. My wife stood off to the side with the lint roller and a bottle of water and said my son to the woman behind us and didn't make a fuss about it afterward. On the drive home she asked if we thought the navy tie was too serious. He said no, and she said, "Good, it looks handsome," like she'd been practicing the sentence in a mirror somewhere. We've had the boring battles too. There was a week where every pharmacy within 20 minutes of us shrugged at the computer and said there was a backlog and could we try again tomorrow. He was too calm and I was not. I had the nurse's number on speakerphone and 3 tabs open and started making a chart like I've never made a chart in my life. It was my wife who broke the stalemate. She called her HR department during her lunch break and explained the situation in the same voice she uses when a contractor tries to tell her a remodel will take no more than a month and she knows they're lying. She got the prior authorization pushed through in an afternoon. She printed the approval and put it on the fridge with a tomato magnet like a gold star from first grade and acted like it was no big deal, but I watched my son write "thanks" on a sticky note and press it under the magnet. She didn't move it for the rest of the week. We went to the courthouse on a Thursday morning with a folder of forms so thick it could have been a cheap novel. He'd done the research and I stood there holding extra copies like backup dancers nobody asked for. There were 3 other families clutching paperwork and 2 were changing children's names that were a dozen vowels long to something easier to pronounce, and no one asked us why we were there. The clerk called his new name in the waiting room and, I won't lie, my knees went a little stupid. The judge was patient and looked like every judge from every movie, and he asked my son 3 questions: if he was being coerced, if he understood, and if he was doing this to avoid debt or legal trouble. My son said no, yes, no in a steady voice. The gavel came down with a thunk that sounded less dramatic than I'd built up in my mind, but when we went back into the hallway, he leaned against the cool tile and laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. He had a paper in his hands that said he was exactly who he said he was, and you could see the relief run through him like a current. My wife met us for lunch after and slid a small box across the table. Inside was a cheap metal keychain etched with the initials he chose. She said, "I guess this was what you'd pick," and he said, "You got it right." She didn't look at me when she said, "Of course I did." The school office tried to tell me the diploma would have to have the old name because that's what the system says, and I told the woman behind the glass that systems were made of people and people can change. I wasn't rude, I was stubborn in the way my son now jokes he inherited like bad knees. We brought in the court order and the clerk typed for a while and said, "Okay, then." The printing company called a week later to confirm spelling because it would cost extra if they had to redo it. I said, "Go ahead and charge me. If the piece of paper my son frames for the rest of his life isn't wrong, then that's the cheapest bill I'll ever be happy to pay." We kept going to therapy. The therapist gave us something called corrections without ceremony that sounds like a dance step and works like one. If you mess up, you correct, you move on, you don't apologize so long that the person who was hurt has to console you. We've been practicing. My wife tripped over an old word at my sister's birthday dinner and I saw her reset her mouth like a typewriter and say it right and then pass the salad. My son kept talking like he hadn't had to flinch. Later, in the car, he said, "That helped." There was an ugly surprise. A cousin of my wife's, the one who thinks every gathering is her stage, sent a group message about a baby shower with no politics, please, and included our son's old name and a list of guests like she hadn't heard anything any of us had said for a year. My wife responded without checking with me or anyone else, "My son's name is, new name. If you can't manage that, he won't come, and likely neither will we." She hit send. The cousin left the chat, which was, frankly, a gift. We had a Sunday in there that felt simple and good. My mother dragged us to church for the first time in years because she said the new pastor had a way of speaking that made even the unfaithful feel like they weren't intruding. I sat beside my son and my wife in a pew my father used to monopolize. An older woman with a flowered sweater in front of us turned during the piece and took my son's hand and said, "You're a handsome young man," and he blushed red enough to match the hymnals. My mother's face did that soft thing again, like her whole life had been waiting for her to learn how to do that expression. The pastor preached about deserts and rivers and things changing shape without changing purpose. I'm not a great audience for sermons, but even I felt my shoulders drop 2 inches. School kept going. There was a senior night for theater where each kid got introduced with a little speech and they invited parents to stand with their children. My son has always loved the backstage more than the spotlight, but he went up there and my wife and I stood on either side of him, and the teacher read his little bio that he wrote himself. It said he plans to study communications because he has things he wants to say and stories he wants to help pull out of other people. He used his new name. The kids cheered like they do, obnoxious and beautiful. He sent off applications and then promptly forgot how to exist without checking his email every 9 minutes. The first acceptance came as a small confetti animation that popped up on his phone, and he screamed, actually screamed, which sent our dog under the table and me into the living room because I thought someone had seen a mouse. He got a scholarship from a school with gender-inclusive housing and a note from a professor who said he liked my son's essay so much that he wanted to invite him to sit in on a class virtually. My son played it cool and then asked me at 10:45 p.m. if the nice professor email meant he would be expected to be funny in person. I told him funny was a bonus, not a requirement. 2 weeks later came the one he wanted most. He didn't scream this time. He read the email, looked up at us like a person who isn't sure if it's safe to be happy, and then he put his head on the kitchen table for a minute. When he lifted it, he had that grin again, the one that saves you from thinking about how you ever made him feel like he had to ask permission to be himself. The watch my mother gave him has become part of him. He wears it to big things now, college interviews, that theater night, a dinner with my wife's father when the two of them pretended to fix the same back gate for the 3rd time. My father-in-law calls him kiddo and young man, sometimes in the same sentence, and sends my son home with jars of pickles that taste the way his garage smells. They've made a language all their own, I think. He learned how to change his oil in the driveway with me standing there with a rag like a man who knows anything about cars. I don't, but my neighbor does, and shouted instructions over the hedge and then came around anyway with a socket wrench, because men love an excuse to use a socket wrench. We found him a used hatchback with the kind of dent you don't have to confess unless you want to, and my son bought a keychain that matched the initials on the one my wife got him. He drives carefully and badly, which is to say he drives like a new person with a license. He has already overcorrected into a curb, and I didn't yell because I remember that feeling of your whole body becoming a question mark around a steering wheel. There were doctor's appointments tucked in between all of this. He had labs that came back fine, and the nurse adjusted his dosage slightly because apparently bodies aren't clocks and you have to listen to them. He chose to do weekly injections instead of every 10 days because he likes routine and hates math. Once, while he was changing the needle, he looked up and said, "Can I ask you something weird?" And I said yes on instinct. He asked if I ever feel like my handwriting became someone else's when I learned cursive. I told him the trick was not to make cursive look like someone else's writing, but his own squeezed into a different shape. Later, after he went upstairs, I sat with that sentence for a long time and I don't even know who taught me to say something like that. If this all sounds like it's been smooth since that last barbecue, it hasn't. There was a morning I left a voicemail for the clinic with the old name because I was running late and doing 3 things at once and my brain defaulted to a track I thought we'd burned. My son heard it because the nurse called us back and asked to confirm, gentle, because she knows who we are now. I walked into the kitchen with my hands up like I was caught, and I said I'm sorry before the apology made it to the doorway between us. He nodded and said, "Thanks for catching it," and then he tossed me an apple. We ate standing up like it was summer. He brought up top surgery the way he brings up hard things, directly, while we were making grilled cheese, like if the sandwich flip stayed right side up then the conversation would too. He wanted to know if we would come to the consult. He knows there's a wait list. He knows we will have to talk to people in rooms about costs that make me sick to think about and recovery times and drains and 1,000 small things I haven't learned yet. My wife went quiet, then bristly, and I felt every part of me try to go to war and then stop because that doesn't work anymore. We made the appointment for the consult months from now, the earliest they had. My wife said she would go. She said it like the words tasted weird, but she said them. Later that night, I found her at the computer reading post-op care instructions and writing down questions like, what is a binder as a post-op garment versus pre-op? What's the difference? In her blocky handwriting. She left the paper in the printer tray where she knew we would both see it. Our son didn't say anything, but he folded it and kept it in the same folder as the court order. My son's voice has been doing a slow roll down a hill. He woke me up laughing one morning because he tried to tell me something about an email and his voice did that hacking goose honk thing teenage boys do, and he had to try 3 times before the sentence came out whole. He pretends not to love that it's happening and then records himself reading a paragraph from a book into his phone and listens, like a scientist comparing field notes. He has started standing in front of the cologne shelf at the drugstore sniffing caps like a kid at a candy shop, and came home with one that makes him smell like cedar and mint and 19. He has turned into a person who eats leftovers directly from the pot at 2 in the afternoon and texts me things like, we out of peanut butter? With no punctuation. He has 1,000 tiny cliches growing legs at once and it is a joy to watch. Prom happened again because apparently there are 2 and I only remember one from my own high school experience. This one my wife volunteered for because you can't keep her from event planning if you try, and she came home with glitter in her hair and said that my son looked like he was having the time of his life dancing like a giraffe on ice. He tried to teach me a move in the kitchen later and I told him my knees are older than his country, which made him spit soda onto the floor and get yelled at for the stickiness. We took him to opening day because baseball is apparently a religion we actually practice. He wore a hat from the college he's probably going to, and when the guy at the beer stand called us gentlemen, he smirked at me like he'd caught me out and then said, you hear that? With the smugness of a person who just figured out he's in on the joke. Our team won for once, which felt greedy. He told me on the train home that the first time we did this after I started trying for real, really trying, was when he decided he might be able to stay. I didn't trust my mouth so I nodded and looked at a spot on the ceiling like a normal person trying not to embarrass himself. Graduation did the thing where it sneaks up on you even though you've been buying shoes and paying fees for months. The cap sat on our dining room table for a week like a pet that needed feeding. He tried it on in his room with the door open just enough for me to see, and then he tried it on again and again. They practiced walking to pomp and circumstance in the gym until even the band hated the song. On the night, my wife pinned his cap with her grandmother's bobby pin because it kept sliding and we took 1,000 pictures while pretending we weren't. When they called his name, I closed my eyes because sometimes I'm superstitious and wanted to hear it first. He took that long, controlled walk to the handshake and the tassel flick and did the thing where he moved the tassel from right to left and pretended it was stupid and important at the same time. My mother yelled, "That's my grandson." Loud enough that a row of people turned around to see who she was claiming, and nobody minded. We had a little party in the backyard with a rented tent in case of rain and a cake that said congratulations only once because we've learned to keep the writing simple. My wife's sister brought those notebooks with my son's name on them a few months ago and followed it up this time with a painfully wrapped fountain pen that leaks but in an endearing way. My father-in-law stood at the grill and told my son the trick is to move things away from the heat when you think they need more. I am still puzzling that one out. He chose his college, the one with the website that says tell us who you are and we will meet you there, and it doesn't feel like fluff. Now, they sent a housing form that let him list his pronouns and his name the right way on every line instead of asking him to click another box as if he were a mistake in a multiple choice test. He got matched with a roommate who plays ultimate frisbee and has a plant he named Kevin. They've been sending memes back and forth like they've known each other for years and I'm choosing to believe Kevin will survive. Move in is in August. He keeps lists in his phone and I keep adding to my own like a man preparing for a flood. He rolled his eyes and then hugged me when I bought him a toolbox and labeled it with his initials. He said, "I don't even know what half of this does," and I told him that was okay, that most of growing up is staring at the tool you need, reading the directions twice, and then calling someone anyway. He said he'd call me. He said it the way people say things when they've decided on them first in their head. I'm not going to pretend that we're brand new versions of ourselves. My wife still has days where she looks at him like she's measuring the space left in her own chest. She has days where she messes up and then resets her whole face and tries again. She signed up for a parent support group and didn't tell me until she came home with a flyer crumpled in her purse and a little less steel in her voice. She has a note taped inside her closet door now with his name written in big letters and 2 pronouns underlined, and she checks it before she goes out like someone making sure they have their keys. The razor trophies keep coming. He has moved on from disposable to one of those safety razors that looks like it could live in a museum. He taught me a thing about blades I didn't know because the internet told him and the internet never told me, and I stood there pretending I once knew this information and forgot. He cut himself a little worse than a dot once and I almost grabbed the car keys. He rolled his eyes and lifted his chin with a tissue. I'm fine, he said around the cotton, and he was. I'm sitting here now with that Ziploc bag in my drawer and the diploma cover, empty because they mail the real thing later for some reason, on the table with a coffee ring on it I wiped up too late. There's packing tape and a permanent marker up on the counter waiting to write his name on boxes in big letters. I think a lot about that line the therapist offered us, grief and love both sitting at the same table. I thought they would always be fighting. It turns out sometimes they just pass the salt to each other and don't make a show of it. The house is still loud with regular things. The dog still hates the mail truck. The milk still gets left out on the counter. My son's laugh is lower and his shirts fit his shoulders and the pile of razors in the cabinet is more organized than the spice drawer. He still calls out Dad? From the hallway like there's something I can fix that he already knows how to handle himself. If you'd told me a year ago that ordinary would be the miracle, I would have thought you were trying to sell me something. Now, the ordinary has a college logo on it and a parking permit and a dorm room number I know by heart. We're not done. We're never done. But when I think about the day coming soon where I'll drop him off and carry his side of a box up 3 flights of stairs and then come home with a car full of air where his jokes should be, I am less afraid than I expected. The life he is building fits him. That's all I ever wanted and didn't know how to say. I'm going to go put that bag of hair in a better box so it doesn't get lost in the junk and then order a spare set of sheets like the list on his phone told me to. He'll complain when I label the box too neatly. He'll roll his eyes. He won't hide the smile. That feels like enough for today.